Hey guys, this is Olaf Wazowski. Welcome to yet another installment of Ableton Live Hacks. Ableton Live 11.1 was actually just released, adding Mac M1 support, which is great. And in this course, we'll be looking at more workflow enhancing tips and tricks. Maybe some stuff you hadn't found out yet yourself. We'll look at a bunch of sidechaining tricks, delay effects, and ways to speed up the editing of MIDI, and also in the arrangement. I'll end up with a couple ideas that maybe don't really belong to one specific category, but that are actually very useful little tips. So let's get started. Hope you enjoy. This one is about sidechaining, and there is enough information about sidechaining to fill an entire course. I'm just going to discuss a couple important workflow hacks for sidechaining. Let's say I've got a kick drum here. It's a very long kick drum. It's debatable whether that's a good choice, but you know, it's a creative choice. So if you want to use a long kick drum, by all means go ahead. And I've got a pad right here. Now, of course, I want to sidechain the pad to the kick drum, or is it the other way around? I'm not entirely sure. I should look that up. But here's the thing. If I want to use a compressor on the pad to duck the sound of the pad every time the kick plays, of course, I'm going to run into a little problem. Let's select the kick, which is this track here. I use that to duck the pad. Now, this doesn't have to be a problem if this is the sound you're after, but sometimes you only want a short pulse as the trigger for your sidechain instead of this long kick that I have now. So what can I do? Well, I could find a different sound like a rim shot or a short clap and use that instead of the kick. But then I'd need to copy the arrangement of the kick. So it's going to take a little time before that actually works out. So what you can do instead is go into the compressor and find this little module here, the EQ module. And what that allows you to do is actually EQ the sound that comes into the sidechain. So you're not actually EQing the sound itself on the track, because that wouldn't make sense at all, but you can shape the sound of the sidechain coming in this case, the kick drum. Let me turn off the kick track here and only listen to the kick drum coming into the sidechain. Use the headphone icon here. If I turn this off, I'm back at the pad sound. And this is, of course, what's coming into the compressor. If I turn on the EQ, there's a low cut or high pass and a frequency dial. So with this, I can actually shape the sound coming into the compressor. I want to make it really thin. Now turn off the headphones. See, this is what the original kick is doing, and this is with the EQ. I can shape this further. And this is much easier to create a certain character for the sidechain ducking. Now the sound coming into the compressor is now this, instead of this. Make sense? So I can keep my long kick and still use it as a ducking trigger for the pads. Here's another one using the sidechain EQ in the Ableton compressors. Let's say this is my master bus and I want to compress a little because I like that. And especially in this type of music, in dance music, electronic dance music, if you use a compressor on the master, you want it to listen to the kick drum, right? To the pulse of the kick drum. That's where that's coming from. I mean, of course, you want to technically make it a bit compact, but that's not the aim of bus compression in dance music. What you want to do is make it dance to the pulse of the kick drum, because that gives it that bounce, right? So let's see if I can get that using the glue compressor. Well, yeah, it does work. It certainly gives it that bit of a bounce on the kick drum, but there's one problem, and that is this guy over here. See how that triggers the bus compressor each time? And if you pay close attention, you'll see that the needle doesn't only respond to the kick drum, but it also gets disrupted by that rim shot, the 909 rim shot. Listen. See? You can see the bounce getting disrupted by that rim shot. So what I need to do is tell the compressor to only focus on the sound of the kick drum. But how do you do that? Well, first you need to find the fundamental of the kick drum. Where is that big body? What frequency do we need to focus on? So I'm going to use the EQ8 for that. The EQ8 has a nice analyzer, and if you double click in the window, the analyzer opens up really big, so you can find the fundamental of the kick drum just by using the little display in the lower left corner. And this is clearly it, right? Do you agree? And it says over here that it's around 45 Hertz. Okay, so 45 Hertz is the frequency we want the bus compressor on the master to focus on. So let's go and turn on the other compressor that I have waiting for me, because I knew what was coming. And open up the sidechain window, turn on the sidechain, have it listen to the kick, of course. And again, I'm going to use the equalizer, but I'm going to use a different filter, a bandpass filter. And I've set it to 45 Hertz, so it's looking at the signal coming in around 45 Hertz, right? The Q is somewhere in the middle, and let's have a listen to how that sounds. Well, pretty obvious. It's only that part of the bass drum and nothing above that. So no rim shot is coming in. Okay. So it's now only applying gain reduction at that pulse of the bass drum. Let me turn off the listen feature there. And let's see how this sounds now. Let's go back to the other compressor for a moment. See that bit? That is annoying me. And I only want the bass drum to trigger the compressor. So that is how you can force your master bus compressor to only listen to the pulse of the kick drum. If you put these sidechaining tricks together, you could actually make a couple of variations on the theme. Like for instance, you don't have to use an EQ in the sidechain path when you want to compress the master bus to the kick. You can also just leave the EQ out and just use the kick as it is as your sidechain trigger. So you're always sure that the compressor gets triggered by the kick only and not by that annoying rim shot like we saw in the other video. So that's one. Then again, you can use the EQ to shape that kick again, you know, make it thinner, make it shorter, well, appear shorter for the compressor, you know, the signal that it listens to. But like we saw in the other video, this way you're much more flexible when it comes to the character of the sidechain. Again, just turn on the listen feature here. So you get that instead of this. So we sidechained the kick to the pads, right? Because maybe you want to create that ducking effect, or maybe you just need it for the mixing to actually make room for the kick in the mix. But if that's the case, then I think there's a better way. Because what happens now is that the kick is ducking the entire pad of the entire frequency range. Let me just demonstrate that. Here's an EQ on the pads, and this entire frequency range is being ducked down each time that the kick is playing, right? But why not just do it in the frequency range of the kick itself, so that not the entire pad is being ducked down, only that bit where the kick needs a little more room to breathe. Well, there is a way to do that, and it requires no compressor. What it does require is the envelope follower, and I'm going to just drop that on the kick track, because what I want is the envelope follower to follow the envelope of the kick and map that to the pad. Now remember, the bass drum was at about 45 hertz, right? Let's just check for the fundamental. It's right over there. So that is what? Well, it's now 42 hertz. Well, let's say it's 45 hertz. Okay, so what I'll do is add another EQ8, this time on the pad itself. And I'll go in there and put this band, could be any one of these. I'm going to just put that on, 45 hertz. There we go. And I'll go back to the envelope follower, take this EQ out, and I can now map this to the gain knob of this EQ band. It's now being ducked to the max. It's minus 15 dB. I want to go back to the kick and tell this to go to 0 and tell this to go to 50%. This is the minimum value. This is the maximum value. If I then go back to the EQ on the pads, what you'll see is that the gain of this band will duck each time the kick is playing. Now what I can do is make it a bit smaller using the Q here. And perhaps if I want to emphasize that a bit, I can actually just turn it up by a couple of dB. See? If I turn it up even more. See how that makes room for the kick almost invisibly? Yeah, I mean, it's not the usual conventional ducking sidechain effect. It's more like I want to hear the sustain of the kick in the mix, but that pad is in the way. But I only want the pads to duck in that frequency range and exactly to the envelope of that kick. And this is how I do that. There is a special plugin for this out there on the market by Waves Factory called Track Spacer 2, which does this and probably a couple more things. But if you don't have the funds to get that plugin, this is how you can do that yourself. Here's a fun one. Stopping a vinyl or stopping a tape with your hand. Well, these days also with CD players and USB players. But that effect of a sudden stop of the music, where it slows down and comes to a halt. Is that possible in a DAW? Well, it certainly is, and it's a fun one I'm going to show you right now. It's very simple, actually. All you need to do is grab a delay plugin and put it on your master or anywhere you want the stop effect to happen. And what you want to do is you don't want to sync the delay. You don't want any feedback. You don't want any dry wet, because that is going to sound like this. That is not what we want. So first of all, we want all wet. We want zero feedback. I do want the repitch mode, because in this mode, changing the delay time actually changes the pitch of the delay. Let me just give you an example. If I change the delay time while it's running. See how it changes the pitch while it runs to that new delay time? Well, if I take it out of sync, so it's not being synced to the tempo of the project anymore, I just get a variable delay time up to 5 seconds. And I'm going to take out the feedback again, because what I want is just one delay line, and I'll automate the delay time just in the master output. Press A to get into automation. Click one of the delay times so it appears in that lane. And let's see where I want this vinyl stop to happen. How about there? So that is the point that I'll change the delay time. Let's see what that sounds like. Maybe a bit longer, like that. So you hear it coming to a stop, but it also starts to play again, because when it arrives at that new delay time, it'll just pick up where it left off. So what I want to do is somehow stop all the audio from playing. And one way to do that is actually somewhere at this point, just delete all the audio, or MIDI, and also make sure that the delay is no longer outputting any sound. So let me just make all the automation visible on the master. So this is the delay time. So let's see where the audio should stop playing. Well, I guess around the time that the audio actually stops. Once the clips are gone, I want to use some automation on the dry wet knob here to make sure that the delay line is no longer outputting any audio. But that's a bit too sudden, so I'd like to give it a bit of a fade, like that. There we go. And that is a vinyl stop in Ableton Live. Here's another one using a delay effect. The question is, scratching, can that be done in Ableton Live? Well, yes and no. You're not going to imitate a real turntablist using the technique that I'm going to show you here. But, you know, if you keep it simple, you might get away with it. I mean, turntablists are real artists, if you ask me. What they can do with 2 decks and a mixer is incredible. And you're really not going to get that level of scratching inside Ableton Live. But, you know, like I said, if you keep it simple, you can get away with it. Like this, for instance. Especially if you keep things buried in the mix a bit. So what I've done is just grab a sample and drop that into the simpler sampler. House. A guy saying house. And just like with the tape stop or vinyl stop effect, it's a matter of automating the delay time here. Let me turn that off to play you what the actual pattern sounds like. Now, this doesn't sound like scratching at all, of course, but this is only to lay down a certain rhythm, a pattern. So I think it's a good idea to start out with that. Just lay down a pattern. Let me just bring everything to the same pitch here. So this is the pattern. Let me put it against the beat. Once I have that, I can create different pitches, because in scratching, the pitch usually goes all over the place, which is great. That gives it a very organic sound. So, you know, just do random stuff to start out with. I want to end the pattern with the full word house, like that. And then after that, I'm going to bring in the delay plugin. Just like with the vinyl stop or the tape stop, I'm going to modulate the delay time. So no feedback, all dry and wet, repitch again, no filter, and just play around with the delay time. And what I did, let me just bring that to the top. It looks pretty random, and it kind of is, but what you need to do is just see what works. It'll depend on the sample, it'll depend on the pitch, it'll depend on the tempo of the track. So what I've done here is just try and figure out where the delay modulation works and where it doesn't. And right at the end, I'm just back at the almost at no delay modulation. And this is the result. And like I said, you're really not going to imitate a true turntablism artist with this, but you know, you can get away with it if you keep it simple and bury it a bit in the mix. I won't tell. One thing I've heard people complain about a lot in the past couple of years is that Ableton Live does not include a multi-tap delay. But in fact, you can create one from scratch real easily. Let me show you. I'm going to copy the vocal sample real quick. Take out the clip and make a new one. I'm just going to enter one note. A guy saying house. Okay. So It's true, there's no multi-tap delay, but a multi-tap delay is nothing more than different delay lines in sync with the tempo, or not, whatever you prefer. And a very easy way to do that is just to drop in multiple delay lines in series. You can also do this on different sends and returns, of course, which makes it a bit more flexible. But the trick here is to take out the linking of the different delay lines, set a feedback, keep the dry wet knobs somewhere in the middle. The modes don't really matter. You can keep those on repitch. You can choose to either turn off the stereo linking or keep it on. Depends on what you want to achieve. In this case, I'll turn off the first two and leave the last one on. And the trick is to just enter, pretty randomly timed delay lines like this. So what's this going to sound like? See, this really starts to sound like a multi-tap delay. And if you enter a ping pong here and there, it's going to get even wilder. You can turn around the rhythms as well, of course. And that's going to give you a completely different delay line. The feedback is very important. You could choose to maybe give the first one and the last one no feedback and only just a little bit for the one in the middle. This is a lot of fun. Maybe for the first one, close up the filter a bit. That's a lot of fun. So there you go. That's a real fast way to create your own unique multi-tap delays in Ableton Live. And of course, if I were you and you find something really spectacular you maybe want to use at some other point in another track, you can group them together just by selecting them all, then Command G, and just drop this entire thing in your user library where you can give it a new name. Multi-tap awesome. And all you need to do now is just drop this in whenever you need a multi-tap delay. Another thing that Ableton Live does not really have is a pitched delay line. Well, up until Ableton Live 11, because we now have the spectral time plugin, which kind of does it a little bit, but not really. And what I mean by a pitched delay line is either pitched up or pitched down. And when it's then fed back into the plugin using the feedback, it gets higher and higher and higher and higher, or lower and lower and lower and lower, depending on what you want, of course. Back in the 90s and 80s, there were special delay machines, echo machines, like, for example, the ones from Eventide or TC Electronic. They could do this exactly. That was a very special effect, and you really cannot do it in Ableton Live using the standard plugins. But there's a very, very, very simple solution to that, and I'll show you that right now. But first, let's have a look at the Spectral Time plugin, and you'll get somewhat of an idea of the effect that I mean. This is the default setting for Spectral Time. House. Just a one-tap delay. If I give it a bit of feedback, you get that? And there's a shift button right next to that. And that does exactly what I hoped it would do, but it does it in hertz. You can go down 400 hertz, you can go up 400 hertz. But that's really not the range that I was hoping for. Let's put it on the maximum low value of minus 400 hertz, and this is what you get. House. So because of the feedback, each repetition that is pitched down gets fed back into the plugin, then gets shifted down again and again and again. And that's what you're hearing. House. So it gets lower and lower and lower. But it doesn't really do it chromatically. It's a bit of a hit and miss. Same if I turn it up. House. So doing it like this doesn't really give me the result that I'm looking for. What I need is actually a normal delay line. Let me drop it in again. Give it a long feedback, dry wet, somewhere in the middle. For this, I'm going to turn off the filter. I'm not going to need that. And I'm going to take this to the arrangement, because that's where the solution to this problem happens. And and I'm just going to freeze this. I'm going to freeze and flatten what we got here. And I think you can see what's coming here. So, you know, it's now just a matter of going in there and doing what Ableton does so well. Go into transposition. Give it a nice ramp up. 84 semitones, that's maybe stretching it a bit. Let's do 24. I may want to put this on Complex Pro for a better conversion. Maybe even 24 is a bit much. Let's go to 12 semitones. How about there? And this is pretty much what I mean. I can also bring it down. 12 semitones, of course. And this works a lot better than the result that Spectral Time is giving me. So there you have it, a pitch delay line. Let's talk about a couple MIDI editor hacks or tricks or tips. First of all, you remember how you can edit multiple clips at a time in the MIDI editor since the previous version of Ableton Live. If I select this bass part here, I can see the orange notes are the bass part and the red notes clearly are the piano. And you can do that over multiple clips. Just need to select them. And there they are. There's my drums, there's my piano and my bass line. Now the new focus button, it's located right here, allows you to go back to the previous behavior of the multi-clip MIDI editor. What I mean by that is if this is not comfortable for you, maybe if I want to change one note in the bass part here, let's see this one maybe. Maybe if I want to edit that. Bring it down in that bit. This doesn't feel comfortable for you because maybe you're afraid that you break certain things, maybe break a chord. You can turn on the focus button and that will bring you back to the previous behavior. Now I cannot edit these notes. You know, right now I can only edit the bass line because that is selected right here at the top. If I select the beats only, these are my beats, I get to edit only those, right? If I select the piano, I can only edit the notes in the piano clip. So that is the focus button. Real handy if you're afraid to maybe mess things up, and it's all up to you. So we just discussed the focus button for the MIDI editor. Another great improvement is, what if you always want to edit these two together, no matter where they are? For now, I'll just drop the bass underneath the piano. But how can we make it so that each time I open the piano clip, the bass clip is in there as well? You know, just like this, just like we did a moment ago. Well, that's very easy. That's a new feature in Ableton Live 11. That's link tracks. If I select multiple tracks, no matter where they are, again, if my bass track is all the way down here, my piano track is right there, I can link them together. What that does is link these tracks together for editing. If I want to move them around, they always move together. If I want to take a bit out, very easy too. I don't need to do this anymore, right? Because then the drum part is in the way, that gets edited as well. Or I need to actually unlinked. I need to do this and then delete that and then do this. It's a bit fiddly. But the link tracks feature enables a much faster editing workflow. And that goes for the MIDI editing as well. If I just go into the piano clip, there's the bass part as well, because that's also part of the linking tracks. And of course, typically Ableton, they implemented this throughout the entire app, so it works on audio just as well. I have 2 audio loops here, and that one. And if I link these 2 tracks together, no matter where they are in my arrangement, then the editing is always going to be over the entire 2 tracks. See, if I just delete this part, it's also gone in the other track. And it works on fades as well. How about this? So that is linking tracks for a wonderful new workflow improvement. This is not so much a hack or a trick, but it's more a tip to point you to a new feature in Ableton Live 11 that is so useful, that is such a huge time saver when you're running into trouble with your CPU. Let's say I got a track here. Good stuff. But maybe I want to, change up the reverb on this reverb channel for a different one. Let's say one by Softtube, maybe. I like the one by Softtube. It's called SAR One Reverb. And it's a very simple plugin. It seems like it's lightweight. I want to create a reverb, maybe 2 seconds here. And there you go. All gone. CPU over 150%. Was this really the one? I mean, I just changed my reverb plugin for a different one. That really shouldn't be that heavy on my CPU. But apparently it does require a lot of power, and perhaps I should take it out and grab the standard reverb again. So at least I can continue working, right? Nope. Still no good. So what's going on here? Well, usually it's a very heavy plugin that's killing the CPU. Maybe my audio buffer in the preferences is too small. Usually those are the things that can bring a machine down to its knees. And but then you need to know which of the plugins it is that's causing these problems. Well, now there's a way to find out. There's a new icon in the lower right corner. It says C, and C is for CPU. If I toggle this, I get a CPU impact readout for all my tracks in the project. Let's turn it on. And now you can see that there is actually something happening on my master bus that's already causing trouble without the project even running, let alone if I try to play it. So what is on there? Well, it's a plugin by IK Multimedia. It's a tape plugin. It sounds great, but apparently it's kind of a CPU hog. So maybe I shouldn't be using that while I'm making a track. And now you can see this CPU meter is all clear, and I should be able to just play the project without any problem. And now you can see how smart the people at Ableton are and how they are focused on your workflow. Let's go back to that piano for a moment. And it's wonderful, but I don't want it wonderful. What if I want to ruin it? Well, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to grab an arpeggiator and randomly I'll pick one of the presets, see what this sounds like. Going to put the rate to 16th notes. Bit more gate. Well, that sounds pretty ridiculous, but what if I want to use it? What if I'm really bad at making music and this is actually what I want to use? The chords that are triggering the arpeggiator right now are not going to work for me because I really would want to have the actual notes that the arpeggiator spits out. So how can you do that? Well, it's actually very simple. What you need is to create another MIDI track, and for this purpose I'll bring that just below the grand piano track. And in the drop down over here, this is where the inputs are. And in this menu, I can choose from where this track is going to record its MIDI. Now, usually you'll leave this to all ins because some people have multiple keyboards in their studio. And this way they don't need to switch around their MIDI inputs all the time. But in this case, I want to choose grand piano because that's where the MIDI from the arpeggiator is. And that's it. That's all there is to it. If I record on the MIDI track, I can just start recording. And you can actually see it happening in real time. So now I have all these notes that the arpeggiator on the grand piano track generated for me. And I can start editing if I want to, because it actually pretty much sucks. There's something else you can do recording MIDI from a MIDI effect that is actually placed on another track. Let's go to the bass here. For this example, I've turned that into a piano sound again. But that was actually our bass. Let's say I want to turn that into a chord. I can pick the chord MIDI effect, whatever, fifth chord. It's just 7 semitones up, but if you don't know that, this can be helpful actually. And just like with the arpeggiator, this works just the same. If I want to turn that into actual MIDI, I can insert new MIDI track. And again, from the menu here, I'll just select the track that the actual chord plugin is on. In this case, grand piano number 2. And I'll just hit record. So now I have the bass part in a fifth chord and I can start editing right away. Music theory is not for everyone, or at least not everybody knows music theory. Like for me, I can find a couple chords, I can find the right bass line with it. But music theory, I know a little bit about it, but it's not really my best quality. Let's put it that way. In Ableton Live, there's been a hack for ages that was actually all about this, where you can actually create a scale by yourself. For instance, let's create a C major scale. That's quite simple. That's just all the white ones, and bring them outside of the clip. So when the clip plays, they don't make any sound, right? Now, if I fold the clip, this will only show me the notes that I entered. In other words, it'll only show me the notes in the C major scale. If I do this with multiple octaves of notes, it'll show me a couple octaves with only the notes that belong to the C major scale. And this has always been a great hack because it allows you to enter notes no matter where they are, they're always going to be in the C major scale. So there's no chance you enter wrong notes, okay? This is great, but it takes a little bit of preparation. And the people at Ableton have listened to their users because what they've done is actually implement this entire trick into the new version of Ableton Live. And it's right here on the left. Just a little button called Scale. If I click that, all the notes in the C minor scale, in this case, because I selected that, but I can just as easily select the C major scale, they light up. And that's exactly the same as the hack that I just showed you. This means that whatever I enter, all these chords that I come up with are going to be in the C minor scale. Doesn't matter what you do, it's always going to sound right. Of course, it depends on your taste, if this is actually usable. But at least it's always correct. And right here at the beginning, what if I want to make that a 4-note chord? Well, just add any of these pink notes because it'll always work. Maybe it's not a brilliant progression, but at least it's correct. I don't think I like this one. Or maybe it's this one that I don't like. Well, this pretty much stinks, but you know what I mean. Using the scale feature allows you to very quickly come up with new progressions, melodies, etc. In the fold section here that I just showed you, there's another button called Scale, and that is to fold the clip into only showing you the scale. See, like that. So now whatever notes I choose to add here, they're always going to work. Maybe this one should go over there. Now there's a great music theory hack. Let me just give you a quick example of how this works in practice so that you can see how fast it works and also how it can be inspiring, especially if you don't have any basic music theory. This will always work. Here we go. Now, if you are into music theory, then you probably know that sometimes a flat note in one scale is actually a sharp note in a different scale. And this has always been a little bit of a thing in Ableton Live because sometimes the way this is shown isn't always correct. Well, now the way these flats and sharps are shown in the MIDI editor is actually up to you. If I go to the keyboard here on the left and I right click, I get to choose whether Live does this automatically for me or if I only want to see sharps or flats. All right. So if you're a music theory buff and this actually bothered you in the past, this is how you can force Live to show you the correct accidentals. I've got a sick beat over here. It's really not that sick, but it's all right. However, I do want to add a couple closed hi-hats and maybe a couple open hi-hats to give it a bit more drive, and a great way to do this is to hold the letter B on the keyboard. If I just click and hold it, I can toggle between the pencil or the not pencil. See, like that. If I just click it, it'll stay in a pencil mode, in draw mode actually, and I can start drawing in my closed hi-hats. So let's do that. Oh, hold on. Let's do that a little slower, maybe. Nope, not really what I meant. Let's try that again. Nope. So what's going on? I want to use something called pitch lock, but it's actually hidden in the preferences. So I'm going to go there, and all the way down in the Record Warp Launch tab, there is Draw Mode with Pitch Lock. And I can turn this on or off. Let's turn it on for now. And let's draw in some close hi-hats. There you go. This is it. But then again, sometimes you don't want this. You don't want to use pitch lock. So what do? Well, there's actually a key combination to toggle it on or off. I'm going to go back to the preferences and actually turning it off because I'm not the person to always want to use pitch lock. But let me just delete these notes and let me do that again. I'm going to press and hold the B button on my keyboard and I'll add the Option key. Now what that'll do is actually temporarily activate the pitch lock feature. So I can now just enter my notes here, go into the open hi-hat again. I'll press and hold B and the Option key. There you go. See? Maybe remove these. Not the best pattern. Maybe same over here. Again, B and the Option key. Take these out. So that's the solution for pitch lock. It's something you can either turn on or off in the preferences window, or you just use the key combination of the B for the pencil and the Option key. Remember, the Option key without the Option key is never going to work. These next couple things don't really belong to one specific category, so I thought I'd just throw them all together into a category named bits and pieces. This first one is a mix trick. I get a lot of emails from people asking me, how do I get stuff to sound more up front in the mix or more way back in the mix? Well, back into the mix is really simple. You just dial down some of the high frequencies and turn down the level. Maybe add some reverb. That should really do it. It's a bit tougher to get things to sound more up front, more in the front of the mix, more in your face. You may know about the Haas effect. The Haas effect dictates that a sound that reflects from a surface, from a wall or the ceiling or the floor or whatever, will reach your ear later than the original sound. And our brain will add these two sounds up and will experience that sound as wider. And one of the specifics of a sound really close to you is that it sounds wider, as opposed to sounds that are far away from you. They always sound smaller, okay? Less wide, actually. So how do we do that? How do we create the Haas effect in Ableton Live? Well, it's really simple. Just use a delay plugin. After all, this is about a delayed sound, a reflected sound. So I'm going to insert a delay effect, and the Haas effect happens with delay times up until 30 or maybe 40 milliseconds. So what I'll need to do is turn off the syncing to the tempo, because the delay times will be too long. And this allows you to use much smaller delay times, like I said, maybe about 10 milliseconds or so. I don't want any feedback. I do not want any filtering. And I want the dry wet somewhere in the middle, because it's going to be a mix of the original sound and the delayed sound. This is the sound without the delay, without the Haas effect. And this is with the Haas effect. So that's a lot wider. I hope you can hear that. That will give you the impression that the sound is a lot closer to you. Now, there's one extra thing you should know, and not all delay plugins offer this. There's a ping pong feature in the delay plugin in Ableton Live, and activating that will make things sound really wide. Listen. So there you go. This is the Haas effect to make things sound wide and upfront. This is something very short, but for me, it was quite important to hear about or to discover, because in one of my earlier courses, in one of my previous courses, I mentioned that I did not like how Ableton had decided to put all the audio effects into their own specific category folders. And as you can see, I managed to fix that. All the audio effects are just the way they used to be in previous versions of Live. And this is actually how I like it. If you also like that better, it's actually a matter of right-clicking and telling Live to not group all the audio effects into folders. That's it. That's actually all there is to it. But for my own workflow, not using group in folder works a lot faster. This track came along a couple times before, and I noticed something, a bit of a problem when I played it on my laptop, on the small speakers of my laptop. And I'll play it to you, and let's see if you can notice it too. Did you notice any problem there? Well, depends on where you're listening, because if you're listening to a laptop, then you probably didn't notice a lot of bass. While actually when you're listening on headphones, there's quite a lot of bass, especially in the very, very low end. And that's because I used this sine wave to play the bass line. And you'll hear it fine on its own. But, you know, this is not a track really meant for the radio. But you never know what happens. And if this bass line doesn't show up on the radio, then that's kind of a problem because it'll sound thin, and the fundamental deep bass is really a big part of this track. So I need to fix that. Well, my first thought would be I'm going to go to the EQ. I got an EQ here, and I can boost maybe somewhere around 200 hertz. That's probably where I think the presence in this bass line is. So I'm going to try and boost that a bit, see what happens. Well, nothing seems to happen, and that's actually to be expected, because what's wrong with this way of thinking is that you cannot boost what's not there. That's actually a fundamental rule of equalizing. You cannot turn something up if it's not there. So I need to find another way to fix this, and ideally I'd go back to a session and add a bass line that's an octave up, so it'll actually translate on smaller speakers. But let's say you cannot do that. Let's say it's not possible to do that. Well, there is another way to fix that, and that is called saturation. Let me go to my plugins and add the saturator in front of the equalizer so we can actually use the analyzer to see what's happening. I'll take that one out. And saturation is actually adding harmonics above the fundamental of a note. So if this is a proper saturator, it'll actually fill up some frequencies around here, just in the same range that I was trying to EQ. The way that it works is I'm going to drive a bit of level into the plugin, bring back the output a bit so the level stays pretty much the same, and you'll see those harmonics appear somewhere around here. There they are. And that's the area that will actually show up on smaller speaker systems so that everybody can hear the bass line. There's a couple of different types of saturation. I like the sinoid fold. I'll go through a couple of these. That's a bit much. I think I like this one. It fills up this area nicely. And now let's play this in the mix. Let's have a look at the peak level of the track now. This is with the saturation, it's at minus 3.2, and without the saturator, it's actually louder. It's minus 2.3. So the saturation gives the impression that it's louder, but it's actually lower in numbers. So that's funny because the saturator gives a perception of it being louder, but it's actually lower in level. So if you struggle with getting your bass to translate well on smaller speaker systems, this is one of the ways you can fix that: saturation. So I'm in the middle of creating a track. Inspiration hit me, and I laid down a kick and a simple bass line. And everybody has this one folder on their system called one shots with thousands of sounds that nobody actually ever uses because it's pretty hard to implement them in your projects. And one of the reasons for that is that usually the tuning of all these hundreds of one shots is all over the place. They're hardly ever really in tune. But sometimes you do find a sound that you actually want to use. And I found one in this case. But I have a feeling it's a bit off key. Yeah, it is. But how can you fix that? Well, there's a very, very cool little plugin in Ableton Live that's called Tuner. And using that just behind the simpler where I put my one-shot sound in, I can see how much off key it is. And you see, I was right. It's about 40 cents off. There's an easy way to fix that. Just go into the Controls tab of the simpler, and there's the detune parameter. Just going to drag that down to about -41. Let's see how it is now. Still a bit off. I think I saw 43 at some point. So let's put it on -43. Let's go 1 cent back. I guess this should work now. Yeah, this works a lot better. No more off-key one-shots for me. So this is pretty much it for the course. I hope you enjoyed a couple more workflow hacks. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.